Chapter 8, The Muwallads. That the conversions from Christianity to Islam were very numerous at first, we can sufficiently gather from the fact that the new converts formed a large and important party in the state, and almost succeeded in wresting the government of Spain from the Arabs. The disorder and civil war, which may almost be said to have been chronic in Spain during the Arab dominion, were due to the fact that three distinct races settled in that country were striving for the mastery, each of these races being itself divided into two bitterly hostile factions. The Arabs were split up into the two factions of the Yemenite or Baladi Arabs, the descendants of Catalan and Moderites, the Arabs of Mecca and Medina, who claimed descent from Adnan. To the latter section belonged the reigning family of the Umayyads, the Berbers, who looked upon themselves as the real conquerors of Spain, and whose numbers were subsequently reinforced by fresh immigrations, were composed of two hostile tribes of Botar and Baranis. Thirdly, there were the Spaniards, the part Christian, part Mohammedan, the latter being either renegades themselves or the descendants of renegades. These apostates were called by the Arabs Moslima, or New Muslims, and their descendants Muwallads, or those not of Arabic origin. The Christians were either tribute-paying Christians, called Ahlu de Dama, or free Christians under Muslim supremacy, called Ajami, or apostates from Islam, called Muradin. The Muwallads, in spite of the Mohammedan doctrine of the equality and brotherhood of Muslims, were looked down upon with the utmost contempt by the pure-blooded Arabs. Their condition was even worse than that of the Christians, for they were, generally speaking, excluded from lucrative posts and from all administration of affairs, a dangerous policy considering that they formed a majority of the population. Stronger and more humane than the Berbers, they were friends of order and civilization. Intellectually, they were even superior to the conquering Arabs. The natural result of their being Spaniards by race and Arabs by religion was that they sided now with one faction and now with another, and at one time, under the weak Abdallah, 888 to 912, were the mainstay of the Sultan against his rebellious subjects. After breaking with the Sultan, they almost succeeded in gaining possession of the whole kingdom, and carried fire and desolation to the very gates of Cordova. As early as 805, the Muwallads of Cordova, incited by certain theologians, revolted under Hakem I, but the rising was suppressed. In 814, however, they again rose, and the rebellion being put down with great severity by the help of the Berbers, the Cordovan Muwallads were exiled, 1,500 going to Alexandria and 8,000 to Fez. But though exterminated in Cordova, the renegades still mustered strong in Spain. At Elvira they rose in Abdallah's reign under a chief named Nabil, and threw off the Arab yoke. And previously to this, Abdurrahman ibn Marwan ibn Yunus and Sadun had headed similar revolts at Bahados and at Merida. At Seville, the Muwallad element was specially strong, and we see from the many family names, such as Beni, Angelino, Beni, Sabarico, which betray a Spanish origin. The majority of the inhabitants embraced Islam early, and had their mosque by the middle of the 9th century, but they retained many Spanish customs and characteristics. When the Arabs of Seville revolted against the Sultan, the renegade party joined the latter. At Saragossa, the Beni Cassi, descendants of a noble Gothic family, set up an independent kingdom, waging war indifferently with all their neighbors. It does not come within the scope of this inquiry to trace out the history of all the revolts made by the Arabs or Berbers against the Sultan's authority, but the policy and position of the Muwallads and Christians are a necessary part of our subject. The latter, though well treated on the whole, naturally looked back with regret to the days of their own supremacy, and were ready to intrigue with anyone able to assist them against their Arab rulers. Accordingly, we find them communicating with the kings of France, and there is still extant a letter from Louis the Debonair to the people of Merida, written in 826, which is as follows: "We have heard of your tribulation, which you suffer from the cruelty of your king Abdurrahman, who has tried to take away your goods, and has oppressed you just as his father Abulaz did. He, making you pay unjust taxes, which you were not bound to pay, turned you from friends into enemies, and from obedient to disobedient vassals, inasmuch as he infringed your liberties. But you, like brave men, we here are resisting the tyrant, and we write now to condole with you, and to exhort you to continue your resistance. And since your king is our enemy as well as yours, let us join in opposing him. We propose to send an army to the frontier next summer, to wait there till you give us the signal for action. Know then that if you will desert him and join us, your ancient liberties shall be secured to you, and you shall be free of all taxes and tributes, and shall live under your own laws." The army promised was sent under the king's son, but it seems to have effected nothing. During the period of religious disturbance at Cordova, when the voluntary martyrdoms became so frequent, and just at the time of Muhammad's accession, the Christians of Toledo, encouraged, we may suppose, by their proximity to the free Christians, revolted in favor of their co-religionists at Cordova. No wonder then that Muhammad imagined that the outbreak of fanaticism in Cordova was but the signal for a general mutiny of his Christian subjects. As we have already seen, the king set out with an army against the Toledans, who appealed to Ordono I of Leon for help. Glad enough to get such an opportunity for weakening the Arab government, Ordono sent a large auxiliary force, but the Toledans and the Leonese were defeated with great slaughter by the Sultan's troops. Within 20 years, however, Toledo became practically independent, except for the payment of tribute. From all this, it will be clear that the Spanish part of the population, whether Muslim or Christian, was opposed to the exclusiveness of the old Arabs, and ready to make common cause against them. The unity of race prevailed over the difference of creed, as it did in the case of the English Roman Catholics in the war with Spain, and as it usually will under such circumstances. The National Party were fortunate enough to find an able leader in the person of the celebrated rebel Omar ibn Hafsun, who came near to wresting the sovereignty of Spain from the hands of the Muwallads. Omar was descended from a Count Alfonso, and his family had been Christians till the apostasy of his grandfather, Jafar. Omar, being a wild, unmanageable youth, took up the lucrative and honorable profession of bandit, his headquarters being at Bobastro or Bishter, a stronghold somewhere between Archidona and Ronda, in the Sierra stretching from the Granada to Gibraltar. After a brief sojourn in Africa, where his ambition was inflamed by a prophecy announcing a great future, he returned to Spain, and at once began business again as a brigand at Bobastro, with nearly 6,000 men. Being captured, he was brought to Cordova, but spared on condition of enlisting in the king's forces. But he soon escaped from Cordova and became chief of all the Spaniards in the south, Muslim and Christian, whose ardor he aroused by such words as these: "Too long have you borne the yoke of the Sultan, who spoils you of your goods and taxes you beyond your means. Will you let yourselves be trampled on by the Arabs, who look upon you as their slaves? It is not ambition that prompts me to rebel, but a desire to avenge you and myself." To strengthen his cause, he made alliances at different times with the Muwallads in Elvira, Seville, and Saragossa, and with the successful rebel Abdurrahman ibn Marwan in Badajoz. Openly defying the Sultan's forces, he was only kept in check by Almundahar, the king's son, who succeeded his father in 886. Omar was further strengthened by the accession to his side of Sherbil, the Count of Cordova. The death of Almundahar in 888 removed from Omar's path his only able enemy, and during Abdallah's weak reign, the rebel leader was virtual king of the south and east of Spain. The district of Regio was made over to him by the king, and Omar's lieutenant Ibn Mastarna was made chief of Prejo. This protracted war, which was really one for national independence, was carried on year after year with varying success. At one time, Omar conceived the intention of proclaiming the Abbasid caliphs. At another, he grasped at the royal power himself, and Abdallah's empire was only saved by a seasonable victory in 891 at Hisenbalay. The battle was fought on the eve of the Passover, and the Muslims taunted their enemies with having such a joyful feast and so many victims to commemorate it with. This shows that a large, perhaps the largest part, of Omar's army was Christian. Another indication of this is found in a poem of Tariq ibn Habib, where, speaking of the coming destruction of Cordova, he says, "The safest place will then be the hill of Abu Abdu, where once stood a church," meaning that Omar's Christian soldiers would respect that sanctuary and no other. Indeed, it is certain that Omar himself became a Christian some time before this battle, as his father had done before him. He took the name of Samuel, and his daughter Argentia, as we have seen, suffered martyrdom. This change of creed on Omar's part changed the character of the war and gave it more of a religious and perhaps less of a national character, for the Spanish Muslims fell off from him when he became Christian and built churches. Towards the close of his reign, Abdallah was able to assert his supremacy, though Omar and his followers still held out. Omar himself did not die till 917, some years after Abdallah's death. The king's successor, Abdurrahman III, was a different stamp of man from Abdallah, and the reduction of Omar became only a question of time, though, in fact, the apostasy of Omar from Islam had made the ultimate success of the National Party very doubtful, if not impossible. After Omar's death, his son Jafar thought to recover the support of the Spanish Muslims by embracing Islam, but he thereby lost the confidence of the Christians, by whom he was murdered. In 928, his brother Hafs surrendered with Babastro to the Sultan, and the Great Rebellion was finally extinguished. So ended the grand struggle of the National Party, first under the direction of the Muwallads, and then of the Christians, to shake off the Arab and Berber yoke. During the remainder of the 10th century, the strong administration of Abdurrahman III, Hakam II, and the great al-Manzur gave the Christians no chance of raising the cry of Spain for the Spanish. The danger of a renewal of the rebellion once removed, the position of the Christians does not seem to have been made any worse in consequence of their late disaffection, and Abdurrahman himself, the son of a Christian mother, treated all parties in the revolt with great leniency, even against the wishes and advice of the more devout Muslims. Al-Manzur, too, made himself respected and even liked by his Christian subjects, and there is no doubt that his victories over the Christian states in the north were won very largely with the aid of Christian soldiers. His death was the signal for the disruption of the Spanish Caliphate, and from 1010 to 1031, when the Caliphate was finally extinguished, complete anarchy prevailed in Saracen Spain. The Berbers made a determined effort to regain their ascendancy, and their forces, seconded by the Christians, succeeded in placing Suleiman on the throne in 1013. A succession of feeble rulers, set up by the different factions, Arab, Berber, and slave, followed until Hisham III was forced to abdicate in 1031, and the Umayyad dynasty came to an end after lasting 275 years. By this time, the Christians in the north had gathered themselves together for a combined advance against the Saracen provinces, never again to retrograde, scarcely even to be checked, till in 1492 fell Granada, the last stronghold of the Moors in Spain. And by 1630, there was not a single Muslim left in the whole of Spain.